Good evening, everybody. Eddie Forde is my name. I'm working in the area dealing with the National Reserve and the new Complementary Income Support for Young Farmers, which is the successor scheme to the Young Farmer Scheme. So I'm just going to take you through some of the details on these two new schemes. So there are new schemes for the CAP 2023 to 2027. They're in place to support young farmers and new farmers. It's what's driving generational renewal on the Pillar 1 supports under the new CAP. And in the National Reserve, you have the young farmer category. There has been a young farmer category in place in the previous National Reserve, which ran from 2015 to 2022. And there's also a category of new farmer. New entrant was the category in the National Reserve from 2015 up to 2022. It's been replaced by new farmer. There's a couple of differences in that, and I'll deal with those on a slide separately in just a few moments. So those of you who will have experience of the National Reserve previously, you'll be familiar with the benefits in the National Reserve, whereby it provides an allocation of payment entitlements on land for which the eligible applicant holds no entitlements. It's also known as naked land, commonly known as naked land. You can also, if you hold payment entitlements that are below the national average entitlement value, those entitlements will be topped up to bring them up to the national average value. There is an overall maximum allocation of 50 eligible hectares per applicant in the new National Reserve from 2023 to 2027. And then the other scheme is the Complementary Income Support for Young Farmers. This is the successor scheme to the Young Farmer Scheme, which is operated from 2015 to 2022. And this will provide an additional payment to eligible young farmers. It's made based on the number of eligible hectares rather than entitlements. Young Farmer Scheme payment was based on the number of entitlements that you activated in the scheme year up to a maximum of 50. This time round, the successor scheme is going to be based on eligible hectares. Again, it's subject to a maximum of 50, and it's paid for a maximum term of 5 years. You also must be entitled to receive payment under BISS, which is the new Basic Income Support for Sustainability, essentially the replacement scheme for the BPS scheme. So in that regard, you need to hold a minimum of one payment entitlement or part payment entitlement. So moving on to the key points on the National Reserve, there is no off-farm income limit for applicants. We had an off-farm income limit in place from 2015 to 2021. It was gone for 2022, and it remains the case. And that will be the case for the duration of the next CAP out to 2027. Again, as mentioned a moment ago, there's a limit of 50 hectares per successful applicant for applications from the reserve. Allocations are restricted to one per successful applicant for the lifetime of the scheme, 23 to 27. So if you're a successful National Reserve applicant in 2023, that precludes you from further benefit in the following years of the scheme up to and including 2027. If you were a successful National Reserve applicant under the old BPS National Reserve that ran from 2015 to 2022, you're not eligible for an allocation from the new reserve, which will operate from 23 to 27. And the allocations from the reserve will be made at the national average entitlement value, and that value is expected to be approximately €155. So if you hold entitlements that have a value that is below €155, they'll be topped up to bring them to €155. So in terms of the differences between the National Reserve Young Farmer category under the old CAP and now under the new CAP from 2023, on the left-hand side, you'll see a number of bullet points which set out details of the old CAP, and then the right-hand side is the new CAP. So first difference you'll see there under the old CAP is that you could be under 40 at any time at the time of your first application under the basic payment scheme. For the new young farmer category under the National Reserve in 2023, you have to be under 40 at the time of your first application to the National Reserve. The commencement date is the same, so you must have set up in the 5 years preceding your first application. That applies to the new cap as it did in the old. The educational qualification is the same again, so you must have completed a level 6 agricultural educational course. The list of courses is set out in the appendix to the terms and conditions of the scheme, which are available on the department's website. The course must be completed by the closing date for submission of applications under the scheme. So that means all aspects of the course, all lectures, exams, practicals, everything has to be completed by the closing date, which this year is the 29th of May. In the old scheme, you had to submit a valid BPS application. This time round, you must submit a valid BISS application. And the allocation then under the new National Reserve is on a maximum of 50 hectares. So the difference between the new entrant and new farmer category, I just mentioned earlier that there are a couple of differences in terms of the new entrant under the National Reserve up to 2022 and the new farmer category from 23 on. So you'll see in the first bullet point there, the first difference is that in the old cap, you had to be setting up for the first time or during the preceding 2 years. There's an additional year now for the new cap. So you can have set up for the first time or during the preceding 3 years. There's also a difference at the second bullet point, whereas under the old cap, you had no agricultural activity in your own name or at your own risk in the 5 years preceding the start of your current activity. Now it is a case that you have had no agricultural activity at any time prior to the current agricultural activity. So you must be setting up for the very first time within 3 years. The educational qualifications again are the same for the new entrant category as they are for the new farmer category as they are for the young farmer category, as discussed in the previous slide. Same applies with the submission of a BISS application and the National Reserve allocation on a maximum of 50 hectares. So that just explains the differences between new entrant and new farmer category in the old and the new National Reserves. The complementary income support for young farmers, as I mentioned, it is the successor scheme to the young farmer scheme that many of you may be familiar with, that has been in operation since 2015. So young farmer scheme applicants can transfer across into the new scheme for the remainder of their 5-year term of eligibility, and they can avail of the new payment rates under the new scheme. And these are higher payment rates. I'll discuss those in a moment. But if you were first successful under the young farmer scheme, for example, in 2021, you received your second year's payment in 2022, you can transfer across for the remaining 3 years of your eligibility and receive the complementary income support for young farmers payment in 23, 24, and 25. So we have a fund of 35.58 million in each year from 23 to 27. That's about 178 million in total over the 5 years of the scheme. So it's a significant investment in generational renewal in supports for young farmers. You'll see again, as I mentioned previously, that the payments are based on eligible hectares, subject to a maximum of 50, rather than the activated payment entitlements that has been the case to date under the young farmer scheme. You must be entitled to payment under BISS, so you must hold a minimum 1 payment entitlement or part of the payment entitlement. And the payment rates that we expect over the course of the CISYF is in the region of €175 per hectare, averaging out over the 5 years of the scheme, subject to the maximum 50 hectares. It's a demand-led scheme. We expect that the numbers successful under the scheme will increase over the 5 years from 2023 to 2027, and that pot of 35.58 million is then divided out to the successful applicants. So we could have a higher rate per hectare in the early years of the scheme, which is then reducing somewhat as there are increasing participants in the scheme. But we expect that it should average out, as said there, in the region of €175 per hectare over the 5 years of the scheme. In terms of the comparisons between the Young Farmer Scheme up to 2022 and the new scheme, which will operate from this year. So again, it's under 40 at the time of your first application for the CISYF. In terms of commencement, you must have set up in the 5 years preceding the first application to the CISYF. The educational requirement is the same as that which applies to the National Reserve. So it's the Level 6 Agricultural Education course. You must submit your BISS application and be entitled to payment under BISS. So that's where the one entitlement or part thereof comes into play. And then a significant increase in the rates of payments to the average of approximately 175 per eligible hectare over the 5 years. When you compare that to the payments on the Young Farmer Scheme, in 2021, 2022, we were looking at a payment of €67 per activated entitlement up to a max of 50. So it's not far short of a threefold increase in terms of payment rates from the old Young Farmer Scheme into the new CISYF. One of the key messages, I suppose, that you should take away here, particularly for people who are going to be participating in the CISYF, is that there is very much a focus on the young farmer demonstrating that he or she has financial and managerial control within the holding. There is a minimum of 5% of the applications are selected for an on-farm check. It involves an interview with the young farmer and so on. And it has been operating at 10% for the last 2 years. And there's a significant and a worryingly high failure rate at the inspection level. So it is vital from your own point of view as an applicant that you're in a position to demonstrate that you have financial and managerial control within the holding. So at application stage, what we need to see for people who are involved in a group entity, which would be a joint herd number or a registered farm partnership or a company. So at least one person in the group must meet the definition of a young farmer. And we've set out earlier what those requirements are. And the young farmer has to exercise effective and long-term control, solely or jointly within that group, in terms of the decisions on the financial and managerial control, which is set out there, the management, the benefits and the financial risks of that group. And how that's demonstrated at application stage is the young farmer's name must be on the herd number that's used for the application. The young farmer's name must be on the bank account that is used to receive the payments from the department for BISS and for CISYF. If the young farmer is involved in a company, the young farmer must be a director of that company and must be a minimum 20% shareholder in the company. And then all members of the group must also complete a declaration form. It confirms that the young farmer has that level of required control within the group. That declaration is signed by all members of the group, and it is also witnessed and stamped by a solicitor. From 2023 on, in terms of the demonstration of financial and managerial control, as I mentioned, when an inspector will arrive out to do the on-the-spot check, they will go through the paperwork in the holding. They will look for the young farmer's name on invoices, receipts, and on the bank account that's used for all the transactions within the holding. So in advance of that, from 23 on, for applications, for group applications, what we're asking for is that applicants will submit some documentation. It contains the young farmer's name in respect of a farm business related transaction within the holding. So what we're looking for is a transaction invoice, the associated transaction receipt, and an extract from the bank account used for the day-to-day farm-related business transactions to show that transaction within the account. So the young farmer's name must be on the invoice, on the receipt, and on the bank account documents submitted for the transaction. Obviously, if the entity that the young farmer is operating within is a company, then the documentation will be in the company name. And we will have verified at application stage that the young farmer is a director of the company and is a minimum 20% shareholder within the company. And once that has been verified, then as long as the documentation is in the company name, then we are satisfied that the young farmer has exercised that required financial and managerial control. So in terms of the inspection requirement, as I mentioned, it's at least 5% of applications. And for the last couple of years, that figure has been up at 10%. When the inspector calls, the young farmer will be interviewed and has to demonstrate knowledge of the day-to-day operation of the holding. So they could be asked, at the last trip to the mart, what animals were bought or sold, or what the most recent transaction was at the merchants and so on. And those, the inspectors will then examine the transactions. They'll expect to see the young farmer's name on the invoices and the receipts and the bank account of the holding that support those transactions. And where an applicant fails the inspection, no scheme payment is made. But in addition, from 2023, there is a significant additional penalty in place. And that penalty is going to be equivalent to the amount that the applicant would have received had they been eligible. And when you're talking about up to maximum 50 hectares and around €175 on average per hectare, you could easily have a payment of €8,500 to €9,000. And if the young farmer fails the inspection, that penalty is applied and will be recouped in the following 3 years. So it's something to be very mindful of. It's a significant penalty if the young farmer cannot demonstrate control. An applicant may not withdraw from the scheme in the event of receiving a notification of an inspection or being notified of an irregularity by the department. So if you get a phone call to say that the inspector will be out tomorrow or the day after or whatever the timescale for notifications is, and you feel there's no way I'm going to pass this, you can't withdraw at that stage. The inspection proceeds, and if you're found not to be eligible, the penalty will apply. And failure at inspection increases the risk of selection for inspection in a subsequent year. The risk criteria that are used in order to generate the list of inspections and the categories for the following year do lean to an extent on those who have failed in previous years. So the risk is greater in terms of a subsequent inspection. So some points that are common to both the National Reserve and the Complementary Income Support for Young Farmers. It's online applications only. And that will include no herd number cases. There will be an option in a little while for people who don't have herd numbers and who have submitted their ER1 form to their local veterinary office and are awaiting the allocation of a herd number, that they will be able to submit an application. All correspondence from the department to applicants under the schemes is online by the INET system. Where the correspondence has been generated for an applicant, the agent who's associated with the applicant receives an email to advise them that correspondence is available, and the applicant themselves, they receive a text message to advise that the correspondence is available. And then the application process. So agfood.ie is now the step that you'll take if you're going to go in and submit an application perhaps for the first time. If you go in to the basic income support for sustainability, and within there you'll see the tab option for the NR CISYF. So that's for new applicants who are submitting an application online. So as I said, through agfood.ie, basic income support for sustainability, and then you see the option for NR CISYF. For those of you who are already in the Young Farmer Scheme and who have eligibility to move across into the new scheme for the remainder of your 5-year term of eligibility as a young farmer. You should be offered the option to submit your application on the BISS application platform. You may have been familiar with the use of a tick box in previous years on the BPS application. It's been replaced by a slider button option on the BISS application from 2023. So once you have submitted your application correctly, a thumbs up icon will indicate that the application has been submitted. In the event that that option is not available on the 2023 BISS application for somebody who is continuing and rolling over into the new scheme, the onus is on the applicant to then submit a new application via the separate application facility on agfood.ie for NR-CISYF. And an example as to why that may not be available to you is if there has perhaps been a change of registration details to the herd number since last year. And in that situation, the slider button won't be available. So just be aware of that. If you are eligible to move across into the scheme, just check for the slider button option on the BISS application. And if for some reason it's not there, you'll submit your application through the NR-CISYF facility on agfood.ie. So that concludes the slides that I have for you. I just leave up that last slide there, which has the contact details for the National Reserve and Complementary Income Support for Young Farmers. That email address is will get you in with any queries that you have directly into the section who administer the schemes, and the low call number there can be used if anybody wants to submit an inquiry by phone. So that concludes my presentation, and thank you very much.